I give my little chicks fermented feed. Stay tuned and I'll show you why I do it and how. Before I started giving fermented feed to my chicks, I did a lot of research on the internet, which I also encourage you to do. I found that it puts the good bacteria in their gut, which helps them not only to digest their food, but it increases their immune system so they don't get sick. I have also discovered that they grow much faster on the fermented feed and they feather out much sooner. I thought about doing a trial with chicks that are fed fermented feed and chicks that were fed on normal dry feed, and I just couldn't do it. Since I've been giving the chicks fermented feed, it's made such a huge difference that I just didn't think it would be fair to those chicks who didn't get the fermented feed. So, no video on that. Another great advantage to fermenting your feed is it's a free way to increase the protein level by up to 12%. I'll leave a link below of the study that shows that, because if you can increase the protein level for your chicks, they'll develop much quicker. They need more protein than the adults do. There's one more thing I'd like to mention. When giving fermented feed to the chicks, try to only give them as much as you think they'll eat for the whole day. You don't want it to sit out overnight because it's wet and it might mold. So give them just as much as they need for the entire day. So I'm going to show you, since I have to start a new bucket, I'm going to show you from step 1 how I do that and get it ready and prepared for them to eat each day. This is the container that I have been using, but my chicks are getting bigger and I've got some more that just hatched and it's just not producing enough feed for my needs. So I am going to start a new container. So here is my new bucket. The first thing I'm going to do is put this in there. But before I do that, I want to show you this. This white bubbly film on top shows me that the fermentation is in process, and it's a good thing to see when you're fermenting feed. Now I'm going to add some more feed to the bucket. Some of you might be wondering what kind of feed I give the chicks. Usually I'll give them a medicated feed. At the moment I'm using something that is soy-free and GMO-free, but as soon as I get through this feed I'm going to go back to the medicated feed. Now obviously we're going to need some more water to put in here. You can start the fermentation process from scratch by using dechlorinated water that's been sitting out for 24 hours. But I don't want to slow down the process any, so by adding the water from the previous bucket and adding some water from another bucket that I have, it will continue the process at a quick pace. There's a couple of tricks to making sure your fermenting is a success. One is you need to make sure there's enough water to cover the feed, at least an inch, preferably 2, and it needs to have ventilation because as it ferments it produces gas which can build up pressure inside the container. And this container is perfect because the lid allows that ventilation and it also keeps the bugs out. Let's give this a good stir, and then I'll put the lid on and put it up on the shelf, and we'll check on it again tomorrow. Okay, it's the next day. Let's see if the fermentation process did its work. Yep, see that white on top? And notice that there is the water here and the feed here. The water allows the good bacteria to ferment the feed, and it separates the bad bacteria coming from the air to hurt the feed in any way and make the chickens sick. Let's stir this in and then I'll gather up some feed for the chickens today. I'm using an old wipey container to collect the liquid left over from the straining. Recycle and reuse, right? This container is for some chicks that I have that are already feathered out. It contains some chick feed that's dry here, some of the fermented feed, and some fermented grains. I give this to them, the fermented grains, at an early age. As they get older, it will toughen up their gizzards so that they can digest more of it as adults. And there's plenty of rocks in the pen where they live, so they can swallow those to help break down these larger pieces of food. This container has food in it for smaller chicks. It has dried chick feed and the fermented feed and no grain. I don't give that grain, the fermented grain, until they've at least feathered out. Let's mix each one of these containers up and give them to the babies. Depending on how old a chick is and how many I have in that pen will determine how much food I weigh out for them. I'll make sure to include in the description below the ratios of how much to give chicks at what age. Here's the food for the teeny guys. I'll put some here and some up here. I used to put this container in there and just let them eat out of it, but this silly mama, she likes to scratch at the food a lot, and she would flip this over and then nobody would get anything to eat. I also made sure to put it in separate places because sometimes this feed can get lost in all of this bedding, and that way, if that happens, they can come up here and eat some of this food here. Let's pour these extra juices back in here. I'm going to wipe all of this off and get that clean before I put the lid on for the next day. This will collect a lot of bad bacteria that won't be good for the chickens. I keep this bucket handy full of water every morning, and as I use items that have fermentating feed on it, I put it in here. When I finish my chores, I wash everything. The reason for that is one, you don't want to use a dirty feed container that has fermented feed on it because it can mold overnight and make the chickens sick. The second reason is you don't want to contaminate the fermenting bucket where you keep your feed because you don't want to interrupt the process of fermentation. If you do, it could get sour and have to start all over again. Okay, we're ready for the next day. Contrary to what you might be thinking, it doesn't make the chicks drunk. It is not that kind of fermentation process. Also, it does not stink. If it smells sour or rotten, you need to throw it out and start all over. The smell that I do get is like a yeasty roll smell, or sometimes like a beer, the hops in the beer that have fermented, but definitely not an alcohol smell or a rotten smell. Now that you've seen how I ferment my feed, next week I'm going to have a video on transitioning some chicks into an adult flock. And as always, y'all have a fantastic day. It doesn't smell foul. Foul. So why ferment the feed in the first place? Ready? You push the red button?
You should put that at the end too.